Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is webinar 3 in the series on with the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium and Hansen International Group. We'll explore the Trust Acceleration Index. It's a framework for turning trust from a relationship asset into an operational advantage. We appreciate you taking the time today to attend today's webinar on building an evolving resilient enterprise, our passion, and synergizing the end-to-end supply chain. And of course, we hope that your family are healthy and safe, especially after
Mm.
that roll of storms that came through the Northeast last night. My name is Jim DeVries, managing founder and managing partner of Enhance International Group. And with us, we have Greg Schlegel, founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, which was established in 2010. And Greg has over 40 years of supply chain risk management experience. And we have gotten into this trust thing for the last 18 months or so, 2 years now. And Greg also has a book called The Supply Chain Risk Management, an Emerging Discipline, written in 2015, and is the former president of ASCM. In our previous webinars, we discussed why transparency alone is not enough and why trust is a critical constraint to collaboration and visibility. Today, we'll take the next step by examining how trust moves, how it can be measured, and most importantly, how it can be accelerated. We explore the relationship between trust, transparency, decision velocity, and business performance, and we'll introduce practical approaches leaders can use to improve trust across the organization and supply chain ecosystems. By the end of today's session, you'll have a new way to think about trust, not as just a soft concept, but as a measurable capability that directly impacts resilience, speed, and execution. So just as a recap of our webinar series, we have 6 webinars in this series. Our first 2 webinars have been completed and are available on both EIG and consortium websites, covering the
Mhm.
transparency myth and the trust matrix. Today's webinar is on the Trust Acceleration Index, as we just discussed. And next webinar is on the quality of interaction. And it's not the data, it's the interaction, of course, of folks. And then in our last 2 webinars, we'll get into the e-exchange of how do you exchange this data upstream and downstream or within your organization. In today's webinar, what we'll get out of this webinar is that you'll learn is trust is not a one direction type of conversation. Suppliers should be able to evaluate their customers just like customers evaluate them on scorecards, as an example. Reciprocity shapes system behavior. So we'll talk about the framework to understand that how trust as an operational capability. We'll get into modeling for measuring trust velocity and direction. And then we'll show you an outline of the practical 30, 60, 90-day trust acceleration approach and some tools identifying trust accelerator and trust destroyers. And then we'll have some insights on improving collaboration, resilience, and decision speed. With that, I'll turn it over to Greg for an introduction of the consortium.
You bet. Thanks a lot, Jim. Welcome, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you today. We are 33 companies, about 1,700 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. We've been in business, as Jim mentioned, for about 15 years, a little over 15 years. On the right-hand side, we have 3 pillars. We do a lot of education. That's how we grew up. We do a heck of a lot of consulting where we lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their supply chain risk and resiliency and now trust journey. And we have a host of heavy lifting software as a service companies who can map the global supply chain, use predictive analytics, and on and on and on. On the left, we have our offerings. We have 2 certificate courses, self-paced online. One is geared towards manufacturers. The other is geared towards logisticians, especially in the healthcare arena. We do a lot of work with NGOs, donors, and healthcare around the globe. We have an online readiness assessment that's supply chain oriented. It essentially evaluates your supply chain process maturity. At the moment, there is a free tool out there. You can avail yourself. We have another online tool. It's geared around risk and resiliency called the 90-Day Action Plan tool. It utilizes AI ML algorithms through surveys online to identify where you are in our 5-stage risk maturity model, who you are in terms of what your risk appetite is, and what your culture is. How do you operate? All right, so we got 2 of those. We now have a third tool, the Trust Acceleration Index, which we are going to talk about today. And then again, we do coaching and consulting where we lead, guide, direct, and coach companies. And we have a host of solutions in supply chain risk and resiliency to do the heavy lifting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. Just a brief overview on Enhance International Group. We're a group of 80 partners and covering people, process, data, and technology. And of course, today we're focused on trust acceleration, but our well-rounded group of expert consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers are first in class, bar none. And we're actually meeting in in September in Austin, Texas. If you're interested, let us know, either remotely or in person. With that, I would just like to get started with the create our own cadence on this webinar and get with it to on today's path. So we're going to get into why trust must be dynamic, because we don't want static way of measuring things. We're going to, of course, introduce the Trust Acceleration Index, the principles of it, and then what accelerates or erodes trust, and then get into trust velocity and decision speed of what we learned through our MXD Department of War project. And those key learnings are embedded into this overview. And then we'll get into some applications, executive applications, and key takeaways. And then we'll just close it out and transition into our next webinar. With that, Greg?
You bet. Thanks a lot. Our first section, folks, is why trust must be dynamic from our point of view. And we have a bunch of quotes across the entire slide deck from our, as Jim mentioned, our 12-month transparency trust project with the Department of War. This one came from supply chain department dean. Trust is a dynamic indicator that you would want to see change over time. You don't want a snapshot. We're going to dig in on that and reinforce that throughout the session. So next, we'll talk about the problem with static trust scores. I mean, you could do that, all right? But to us, trust is not a snapshot. Basically, from our research, most organizations treat trust as maybe a survey one time, a relationship assessment one time, and maybe an annual review if you're lucky. The reality is trust can improve over time. Trust can deteriorate over time. But when you build and improve trust, it compounds over time. So essentially, our net is trust behaves more like momentum than a discrete score from our point of view. We have another quote. Trust is the dynamic indicator that you would want to see change over time. This comes again from a university supply chain dean. So the net of static trust scores, as soon as you assume you have trust, you may not have it, because it takes a long time to build up trust, folks, and it takes a very short time to destroy it. That's our observation. More on that. How about the new executive question? Our webinar 2, if you attended, answered the question, Can trust be measured? We're absolutely convinced it can. Uh, this webinar says, can trust be accelerated? So let's talk a little bit about that. The organization, from our point of view, that moves faster are not necessarily those with more data. They are the organizations with more trust. And hopefully we'll reinforce that during our discussion today. So a quote, trust is not just something to measure, it's something to manage and accelerate. We're totally in line with it. The organizations that build trust faster make faster decisions and better decisions, and we'll dig into that today. Another one, the key thing people want out of building trust is real use cases with ROI. We're getting there. This is a first of a kind approach, and we're building on that every day. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And so as we move through here, as Greg said, the problem with static trust scores are it's a snapshot, it's a survey, it's a relationship assessment, an annual review. Those are the things that we are used to seeing. We've all done those over the years. And we know that trust improves over time or deteriorates or compounds over time. And so as Greg said, it's behaves more like momentum, and it needs to be focused on that. So trust has velocity, right? So trust moves over time. It can be accelerating, stable, it's accelerating. So, you know, the critical leadership question is trust moving in the right direction? And that's always the question of any executive leader. And as an A&D executive said, the organizations that move faster are not necessarily those with more data, but they are the organization with more trust. And that was taken from a large OEM A&D executive. And so we really need to focus on trust velocity as a leading indicator. When trust accelerates, collaboration improves. When it decelerates, risk increases before performance declines. So why does trust matter? Why does velocity matter? The decision speed depends on the trust speed. So without trust, you're looking for more validation. You're escalating, more meetings, more delays, more excuses on not moving forward, and more frustration of why the thing isn't getting out the door. And with trust, early warning signs, faster collaborations, you're being proactive, faster recovery, and your cost, of course, decrease. And so trust velocity drives decision velocity, as it says there. So with that, we're going to move to this polling question. Rank the factors that cause the greatest delay in supply chain decision making, if you would be so kind as to enter into poll EV with the code up in the right-hand corner. You should be able to uh, uh, choose the ranking of these. With that, I think there's some questions in the Q&A. Hopefully we can get to those since uh, uh, so Mark asked, can you expand on your statement that you get better decisions when there is trust? Greg, do you want to take that?
uh, we're thoroughly convinced, Mark, that that's the case. All right. So let me hold on. Uh, uh, well, here's the deal. Just like we are just asking you to rank the factors that cost the greatest delays, what we have heard in our 18 months of research now is if only if only our suppliers would have told us 2 months ago that they had a problem in production with our parts or products. If they only told us, we would have helped them move along and get the product out the door. All right. And so we've heard that time and time again over 18 months. And it's a matter of fear. Maybe it's a matter of bravado. but the suppliers tend to be fearful of giving a customer, all right, an early warning that says, we have a problem with your product. All right. And so that's the best first blush reaction I can give you on that question.
Any other questions out there? With that, we see some folks answering the queue here. Unclear ownership came up at the top and organizational silos. Definitely a very, in any corporation I've ever encountered, the walls don't help. The silos don't help. And then who owns it? The ownership is where is a result of trust, not having trust, or it can create it. So it's kind of, to me, it kind of goes in and out. That you build those silos, which creates distrust, and then you build more silos because you have that distrust. That's my observation. Greg, yours?
No, I kind of agree with the ranking. Uh, what we have heard in our research is unclear ownership. That's always an issue. Organizational silos, I'm not surprised that that's second because many of all our supply chains are still siloed. They're departmentalized. Even within their own supply chain group, they don't share enough data. And why don't they share? Because there's a lack of trust between the departments. So if you can take that and expand that, extrapolate that across a 25 level supply chain, node, it gets real nasty real quick.
All right. Well, if you have any other comments, do put it into the Q&A because the chat is not working. We apologize for that inconvenience. With that, Greg will take us to the next section here.
Yep, our section number two, we want to introduce and give you a little more clarity on what we call the Trust Acceleration Index, or TAI. So let's take a look. The Trust Acceleration Index, it's a methodology. It is now patent pending. And what we see is TAI to us integrates these threads. Trust Matrix Insights, which we'll talk about throughout our 6-level series. PWG, what the heck is that? That's Performance Willingness Gap. That's part of the patent pending methodology. We'll talk a little bit about that. TAI also captures and integrates behavioral indicators. We call it behavioral dynamics. It's part of the trust molecule. TAI also integrates collaboration signals back and forth. You'll hear us talk about it. Trust is a reciprocal agreement, has to be reciprocal. And then TAI also integrates transparency trends or lack thereof. All right. So TAI, according to us, answers these questions. Are we improving trust over time? Are we stagnant? Are we declining? So we measure trust, and then over time, we plot it and make recommendations out of TAI to improve it. All right, couple of quotes again. The interoperability is critical in putting something together with end-to-end compliance, security, and visibility. No argument there. And the net, we measure the direction and momentum of trust. It's not just one score snapshot, as we said. That enables leaders to identify opportunities from our point of view and risks before they appear in traditional performance metrics. We're going to talk about lagging versus leading indicators, which I think is very important. Here we go. In supply chain, we always talk about leading and lagging indicators, whether it's macroeconomics, the whole 9 yards. Most companies measure the lagging indicators too late. All right, they lag. I mean, we calculate, we look at it, got a dashboard, red light, it's late already. Things like missed deliveries, program delays in projects, escalations, disruptions. Those are to us lagging indicators. Trust takes a different approach and looks forward into leading indicators like, now these are different, sharing behavior, a level, you got to measure that on a regular basis, responsiveness in terms of data transparency, reciprocity, meaning how am I doing as a customer and how do I look to the supplier and so forth, and then early warning, participation. So again, a couple more quotes. If you have a trusted supplier network, they will inform you of a disruption earlier than your nearest competitor because you've worked out the fear factor in trust. Net, TAI focuses on leading indicators to drive action. All right. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. We'll get into the next section here on what accelerates or erodes trust. Trust doesn't improve by chance. It's the result of consistent behaviors, aligned incentives, transparency, and positive interactions over time. Likewise, trust is rarely destroyed by a single policy or system. More often, it erodes through delayed responses, inconsistent actions, fear. Always fear is the biggest one, it seems like, in the misuse of information. So in this section, we'll examine the behaviors and conditions that strengthen trust and the hidden actions that quietly undermine it. We'll identify the behaviors, incentives, and conditions that increase trust and the hidden actions that cause it to deteriorate. So what accelerates trust is a question. Trust grows when organizations can demonstrate things like predictability, responsiveness, transparency, fairness, non-punitive engagement. Trust doesn't grow because organizations talk about it. It grows because they consistently demonstrate it through these different behaviors. The key takeaway is simple. Trust is a behavioral outcome, not a communication strategy. It's not like we're going to get more trustworthy because we have a rah-rah session, I often hear, or we're going to improve the trust in the organization. We're going to come around and we're going to have a workout. Workouts do help, but it doesn't help intrinsically. Those are superficial types of things. Not saying you shouldn't be doing them, but you need to look beyond that. So as an A&D executive said, having a process, having a trusted data sharing structure, and having governance body that is going to use the data and accelerate decision making is a competitive advantage. So with that, we're going to look at, it's kind of almost like a FOMO kind of thing. It's not quite FOMO, but it's the fear drivers of fear of punishment, exposure, fear of losing leverage, fear of being wrong, fear of blame. We heard this over and over and over from everybody up and
Yepper.
down the supply chain, whether you're an OEM or you're a tier one or a small business owner. These were the first 10, 15 minutes of every interview talked about the fear of something, and of course, those defensive behaviors are cause stagnation in your ability to share data. And so fear is often the root cause of delayed decisions, withheld information, and reduced transparency. So it's almost like, well, because I have a fear, I'm not going to share. And because I don't get what I need, then it goes into this black hole of stagnation, I call it. And what the executive said there is, the absence of trust is not usually caused by a bad intent. Again, this is something that nobody sets out and says, "Oh, I'm going to create this environment." It's caused by a fear of consequences. Is if I shared that information, then it's going to come back at me, and I'm going to get reprimanded, or maybe I'll get fired from the company because I'm not allowed to share that information. So it always comes from the top, as all these things. And so You have to protect your suppliers from misusing their data. That's a very often, when you get into the engineering and the supplier discussions where the suppliers are providing parts and so forth. This is a very common issue is the suppliers don't want you to misuse their data and vice versa. So it just kind of goes into that circular motion there. So, what destroys trust, over time, trust erodes faster than it grows. We know that. You can have a great relationship and a 3-year relationship. You do one thing of distrust and boom, you gotta rebuild that whole thing all over again. And they are some common trust destroyers here are punitive reactions, unpredictable behavior. It often results in scope creep. We all know about scope creep, and that builds distrust, especially working on large projects. We always were all focused on creep all the time, and as as the project goes into overruns, then and over time, that it always causes problems. The misuse of information and that lack of reciprocity that is so common. So, as an A&D executive said, you can't just go and demand things of your supplier base. They have to be ready to do something with it. So, how do you build that relationship uh, so that when a single event occurs, you don't destroy the relationship? You're proactively, events will happen. We'll always have surprises, but if you have a strong relationship, you're able to work through those. But if you don't have a relationship, then when that event happens, it takes a long, long time, if ever, to repair it. With that, we just want to give you a brief overview on our 30, 60, 90-day approach on trust acceleration cycles. Uh, we view that as you improve on different trust factors, we have 25 trust factors that we identified. It's more of a maturity of trust as you move through those trust factors. Uh, you'll want to come up with plans to address each one of those trust factors. So our goal is to find out which of the 25 trust factors are most relevant for you that can be worked on, and we work on them in the right order with you, the client, to uh, demystify them and address them in 30, 60, 90-day plans where we identify them, adjust the behaviors and governance on that trust factor, and measure the acceleration and impact to the uh, relationship over time. And then after 90 days or 180 days, whatever it takes to address that trust factor, we would then go and reassess and say, well, what data now and what trust factors are now the most important to overcome? And then build that up, build that trust over time so you can accelerate the movement of the data and information between the two entities. And so we want to assess, progress, and reassess our trust factors with an action plan, and that trust improvement should be managed on a continuous cycle, as it says there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Yep. Good, good, good. Yepper. Our fourth section, folks, is interesting. Trust velocity and decision speed, because we know in supply chain speed is life. So let's take a look. We have something that we put together called the trust, transparency, speed flywheel. Let's take a look at that. In the middle, over on the right, I would say we'd start with the second circle, which is greater willingness to share data. We've heard that. We asked it a million times during our project, and that's where we came up with as Jim mentioned, a host of critical data elements, a host of critical trust factors, and combine them to develop and calculate a willingness to share. We can calculate that now. Once you have that, that equals more transparency. Once you have more transparency, reciprocity between customer and supplier, supplier to supplier, that equates to better decisions, as we said. We've heard it, we've codified them, and better decisions, faster decisions result in greater performance. We have seen that there's a host of caselets at the moment out there from the Edelman Risk Report and other areas, especially in the university arena. And with greater performance, you can build more trust, and it's kind of a circular approach. All right. On the outside, on the right, are the outcomes, some positive outcomes of this self-reinforcing cycle. You get earlier warnings, as we mentioned. You minimize that fear factor between the two entities, stronger collaboration, less friction, as Jim mentioned, faster decisions. We've heard that and seen that, and that equates to better results. So essentially, over on the left side, it's trust, transparency, decision speed, better outcomes, and a quote. Many times you'll find out that multiple customers are using the same chip provider, uh, 2 tiers down and farther. And that's potentially a choke point. You need to understand that that's part of the visibility thread of supply chain risk and resiliency. So we have a few more. How about the economic value of trust? Try to put something together on the left-hand side, the hidden financial impact without trust. And I think Jim mentioned a little bit, you have what? More meetings, more audits, more verification, more escalation, more workarounds, higher admin costs, longer decision cycles. That's the negative. With trust, as you improve it, faster alignment, earlier risk identification, less fear, fewer disruptions, reduced cost, productivity improvement, resource utilization, very good research, and speedy decisions. All right. Why? Over on the top right, if you don't have trust, you pay the trust tax. It's a tax. We look at it as a tax. Why? Because you have delayed decisions, then that leads to higher cost. If and when you have better trust, you get the speed dividend. Faster decisions equals greater value. So we got a couple of quotes, I think, somewhere. Organizations really measure the cost of distrust, yet they pay for it every day in terms of the trust tax. So the net on the economic value, to us, trust creates measurable economic value by doing what? Reducing friction in the supply chain, reducing transaction costs while increasing execution, effectiveness, and speed. Speed is life in supply chain. I'll turn it over to Jim.
And with that, we'll talk about the speed of execution advantage. Decision velocity is the competitive advantage. In the traditional environment, we talk about you identify the issue, you validate it, you escalate it, investigate it, approval, action, and this is linear. And we know that these steps here are very circular and getting things done. In a high trust environment, if you ever worked in one, you're not going through that. And it's such a relief when you're in this kind of environment. You identify the issue, it's shared early, there's rapid alignment on what to do, and there's action. It's pretty much that way. So the message is speed is not created by technology alone, speed is created by the trust, reduction in the need for verification. Okay. And organizations with higher trust velocity obviously consistently outperform organizations. So when we look at companies over time, and you talk about maturity models, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is the one of the key things that when in supply chain and in a lot of different areas, you could any area of the company, this is where we feel a lot of folks get hung up is they never figure this out. So it prevents them from getting to that next level because they've never built underlying trust within the organization. And therefore they go back to, uh, you know, they can only get the organization so far. So they kind of peter out. They get new management and it goes around and around and around because they've never address the trust issue of sharing of information. With that, we want to close it out a bit on the executive applications and key takeaways for this. Again, trust does not scale through good intentions alone. It scales through governance, through the incentives, policies, accountabilities, and protections that shape behavior. Leaders influence this. And we always talk about leaders. Without the leaders buying into this, it's just not going to work. When transparency is rewarded, information is protected, and collaboration is encouraged. In this section, we'll examine how trust can be operationalized as a governance lever and used to accelerate decision making, visibility, and organizational performance. And so we'll get into the trust score, a little bit of the trust score and how it works at a high level. A trust score is not a measure of friendship or satisfaction, as it says. It's a measure of the likelihood that critical information will be shared accurately, willingly, and on time. And on time, we're not saying on time from the provider. The on time is defined by the recipient on their need for that information in order to take action. Without that, timeliness means nothing. And so what we've assessed is or come up with is trust scores, and you have different levels from low trust, at risk, and moderate trust. The algorithms behind it, as the patent pending, as Greg mentioned, is what's measuring that. But we are able to, kind of identify what are the behaviors in our study, in our 18-month study, and what we saw from the folks that were participating, that these are the behaviors that they demonstrated with us here. And so the higher the trust score, obviously, the less time it takes to make decision, and time is money. So pretty straightforward from that perspective. But the key is the underlying algorithms to measure this through our TAI process. And so what does it look like from an executive relationship heat map perspective? You may have different suppliers that you're working with, and they will each get a trust score, and we can segment it by things like relationship health, fleet agility, churn rate. This is for like TSPs, transportation service providers, but it's those are the three categories for them. It could be different for your particular application. And so in you have supplier scorecards, TSP supplier scorecards, or any kind of scorecard between two groups of people, customer scorecards. And so this would be an extension of that scorecard and really addressing the elephants in the room that often are not addressed in scorecards because you're looking at OTIF and you're going, okay, why is OTIF? Why do I think my OTIF is good? And the other side says it's horrible. And that's always a discussion with every customer and supplier and vice versa. They argue about it for years. The argument could go on for decades. They never get to the underlying problem. The underlying problem is trust. They don't trust each other's data that they're sharing in to calculate OTIF, the number one metric. And so we move on to the KTIs. So we came up with these key trust indicators and measuring the behaviors that drive the performance. And the KTIs are leading indicators that measure the quality of the interactions and the willingness to share information and behavioral conditions that influence transparency, decision speed, and operational performance. And so while KPIs measure outcomes, we also talk about the X's that are driving the KPIs. The KTIs measure the trust conditions that predict those outcomes, whether they're at the input level or strategic level, the operational level, or the tactical level for that matter. So KTIs are kind of an underlying set of indicators to measure. And that's what we help through the Trust Acceleration Index program. We will measure those things. And then we look at it from three perspectives, turning those trust insights into executive action, I should say. Uh, Entitlements, what the trust earns from a supplier segmentation and visibility perspective. And we can go into this offline if you like. The oversight, what leaders watch, the risk monitoring and performance, and then the action, what actions to take, and linking to incentives and recognitions and 30, 60, 90-day plans. So that's the closed loop system that we have built as part of our patent pending so that we are addressing this executive's question is to have a process, have a structure, have a governance body that's going to use the data that we receive. So it's a trust in that data. And the takeaway here is trust should be governed like any other strategic asset, allocate visibility, incentives, resources, and attention based on measurable, trusted conditions, not assumptions. And we all know what happens when we live our life with assumptions. With that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Got a couple more takeaways and actually a bit of an approach to transition to the next webinar, which we are calling Quality of Interaction. And so let's take a look at a couple of additional takeaways. Hopefully you got the sense that trust is an operational asset now. Trust moves things. Trust accelerates things. And then when you move and accelerate, it compounds things, good things in terms of data sharing, transparency, reducing costs, and increasing speed. So organizations, from our point of view, that intentionally accelerate trust gain a measurable advantage in speed, resilience, and performance. And we're getting this from our 18-month Department of War research project. Couple more threads. So what does TAI enable? It helps leaders monitor the trust trends, something a little different, leading indicators, improve collaboration between partners. It will reduce the decision friction because you reduce the fear, as Jim mentioned. It increases organizational readiness, we feel, and improves resilience across the ecosystem. So the net on TAI, from our point of view, trust becomes a strategic operating metric, brand new concept. All right. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Well, we got one more question for you in the poll EV. Which trust destroying behavior has the greatest negative impact on collaboration? It's a ranking one like the last one. You have punitive reactions to bad news, inconsistent priorities, delayed responses, withholding information, lack of follow through, one way information requests, and anything else. I guess you put it in, not the chat, put it in the Q&A. So with that, Mark asked the question on the scoring example. We gave you a light scoring example. To be quite honest, we had a scoring example in in an earlier version, but it was just too much to put into this. But we'd be glad to share with anybody offline a scoring example and more how it works, more how the engine works now that we have it fully patented and protected. So with that, delayed responses, inconsistent priorities, lack of follow through. Those are so the question to me when I look at these is it the cause or are these are the impacts? So we got withholding information has a big negative impact. The lack of follow through, absolutely. Delayed responses, seen those. Greg, your thoughts?
I think we've seen just about every one of these through our 18 months over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yep. appreciate the engagement, but there's a lot of trust destroying behavior going on in every supply chain without a lot of folks understanding why.
Yeah.
Because one of the threads the DOW asked us was, can you tell us what data elements supply chain people share? Can you tell us and identify what data elements they don't share? And the biggie, why don't they share? That's what we see right here. And we found many, many, many more.
Yeah. The ones that we seem to hear the most were the punitive reactions.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Fear of
Um,
reprisal.
so it seemed like the further uh, the further upstream, you know, because the OEMs were the ones are handing out these punitive reactions. So it seems like the small guys, the small manufacturers really fear this more than the large OEMs. With the large OEMs generally are more of the responses that we're seeing here. That's just my observation.
Mhm.
I don't know, Greg.
I would agree with that. Yep. I think what we found is the lower you go in an OEM supply chain node and bill of material, the smaller the suppliers are, and they get very, very fearful about why are you asking that about this data? And they fear that it's going to be used against them. That's what we heard over and
Yep.
over and over again.
And they're going to steal the IP and then set up a shop next door because it, and then or uh, create that capability that they have with a competitor
Uh,
and lock them out of business. So their fear of loss of volume. So, we work with a lot of defense contractors, and the buy cycle on defense is very uh, periodic, to say the best, to say the least, I should say. And they say, as soon as we ramp up to be able to meet the demand from the Department of War now, they ramp up and then all of a sudden they pull all the orders and then they have all those capital assets with nothing to make. And then they said, oh, you should use that time to make commercial stuff, but it's still pretty hard for them to pivot back and forth to survive the good times and the bad times of whenever the government tends to buy. So that was a very, very common thread that we heard from the manufacturers. And so they tended not to want to scale and grow. They could grow faster, but they're very uh, hesitant to try to grow. And if the growth means sharing of information, because sometimes you want to have partners to grow to disseminate your risk, you're actually then hitting yourself in the back, so to speak. So it's not an easy problem to solve here at all.
mhm.
So, but first you got to be able to measure it and see what it is and see what have those
Yep.
conversations so you can address them. And I think that's really what we got out of that project. One of the major takeaways from the project. Greg, any other thoughts on that?
Nope, I think that's about it. It's uh, that covers it
All right.
pretty
So with
good.
that, I think we're ready to close it out here today.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, we'll just close it out with a little bit of how do you engage with us? Well, you can certainly engage and join us as alpha testers. This is a first of a kind, so we're working with over 25 different companies at the moment across all industries, including software and so forth, software companies. So you could join us as an alpha tester. Early involvement allows you to shape maybe your trust system with us, and it will help build collaborative trust building. We've given you a lot of cause and effect and I'll say impacts of building trust and how do you connect with them. Well, there's three different threads on the bottom. The first one is the SCRM consortium inquiry. That'll take you right to one of our inquiry forms. You can fill it out and it comes right to us. The second is the Trust Acceleration Index. There is a tab on our website which will walk you through and give you additional insights into the process. And then the third element on the bottom, the link is actually our supply chain transparency survey. Feel free to go in there and fill it out. That survey is coming out of the project. So that's three different ways you can engage with us in terms of perhaps building collaborative trust within your supply chain. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
So just as we close it out, I want to thank everyone for putting up with the Zoom problem there of chat and putting your questions in the Q&A. Hopefully we answered them all. I just checked them. If you have any questions right now, we'd be more than glad to take them. And hopefully you got something out of this webinar that you were expecting. If you want to hear more, as Greg said, pick up a phone or send us an email. We'll be more than glad to walk you through more details of the Trust Acceleration Program overall. Today we covered a bit of the framework, the model, the taste of the 30, 60, 90 day, some tools and some helpful hints and key findings from our our 18-month engagement with Department of War. And next webinar, we'll get into something that is adjacent to what we've come up with so far, and that's the quality of interaction. It's not just the data, it's the interaction of folks, of course. A bit from a change management perspective, but a little bit of twist on it than my traditional change management. And then we'll get into the technology piece of it is, well, how would you share information up and down the supply chain? What would it actually look like? And how would you then scale both TAI and N-tier transparency system? How would you scale that in a company? So those are the remaining webinars for the series. And we thank you again for coming to us today on this summer day. Hopefully it's not too hot where you are, and hopefully there's no bad storms coming in to you. Greg, closing comments?
Yeah, you bet. Again, thanks a lot for engaging with us. We think trust is going to be the new infrastructure for supply chain performance, risk management, and resilience. So if that appeals to you, feel free to connect with us and we'll we'll explore together. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Greg. And just remember the core message, data alone doesn't scale, trust scales. So if you're looking to scale your company without trust, that would be pretty tough. And if you want to accelerate the scaling of companies from MPI startup to scaling wherever you are in the growth of your company, from a people process data perspective, we feel that that's trust will help you accelerate and maximize your growth and EBITDA and cash flow. And of course, on time and full service. So again, thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Have a great day.